to stop. He's dead right. The Marks and Spencer's bloke's right. Mark, best wishes to your family. Look forward to seeing you again at an event soon. And I promise your wife, when I see her, I won't read her poetry. Give her that assurance. Mark Constantine is the CEO of Lush. The book is The Poetry Business School. And it's HarperCollins. It's out now. All right, thanks, Mark. What have we got? 5 tonight. Let's go back. That gave us a bit of a break, didn't it? From a fascinating conversation where I'm learning so much, particularly from young men, principally in their 20s, as to what part of the appeal of influencer Andrew Tate is. Kevin's in Birmingham. You work in this field, it says here. What do you do then with coaching, Kevin?
Yes, so Nick, I coach young adults in sport, in athletics.
Right.
And which we're finding a lot with young men, if they haven't had any role models, or they're coming from single parent backgrounds, or the dads have not been there throughout their development, they tend to gravitate towards Andrew Tate's comments and what he means.
And what is it they take then? I'll ask you the same question. What is it you think is the message that resonates?
So I think when they go through a difficult point in their life, they watch Andrew Tate and they get some sort of answers for what's gone wrong. And those answers are more on the basis of racism, misogyny, and it literally just goes towards hatred, if you like. And us in the sports field are trying to recorrect that and trying to gravitate them to a more positive outlook on life. And
do you ever address the misogyny that Tate uses?
We question them on it. So we'll question why they think it. And it does, they can't answer it, which is quite funny in some senses. When you question them and when you delve deep into it, they can't answer the reason they feel that way towards people.
Is there a degree of resentment?
In the first sense,
from the lads who arrive, perhaps, and they don't feel the world's gone their way, they possibly haven't had the greatest of family backgrounds. How much of a level of resentment is there?
Trust. You've got to gain their trust. They've got to respect you. So you have to get through this respect aspect as well. And even
how do you do that? Because you can't order someone to respect you. You have to earn respect. You can't just demand it. So how do you do that?
Basically treating them with respect. So what I've found is listening to them at least and becoming that role model, listening to them, taking their thoughts on board and having an open mind, and then they're more likely to gravitate towards you and speak to you. Right. But if I'm going to argue against what they think and go, that's absolute load of rubbish, then they'll start arguing back and I don't get anywhere with them. So I have to literally listen to all the hatred first and then put my points of view on.
Enjoyed our conversation, Kevin. Good luck with what you're trying to achieve. Let's give this couple of messages and texts that have come in. Chris in West Norwood. Men can't deal with rejection. They think women owe them. And now women have more choice. We don't need men, so we see these men getting angry that they can't own women. That is an incel, and that is what Tate represents. Involuntary celibate, of course, is an incel. This comes in from Bernie in Harrow. What's fueling this work about Andrew Tate? You and your listeners have probably never heard his voice until this morning. Well, I had heard his voice, only in clips. I'm not a fan or a follower. But what's fueling this conversation, you're not listening, is the horrific crimes that were committed. And he had watched hours previous. He had been and had watched a lot of Andrew Tate. So, Bernie, hopefully you can get your head around that. The music means we must move on. It'll brush their teeth. Why? Explained by the relevant government minister, Stephen Kinnock.
30% of children in deprived areas have tooth decay. Now, as a government, we could just step back and say, well, we'll just leave it up to everybody to do it. Or we can say, look, that cannot be right.
With so many of you wanting to have your say about Andrew Tate in the light of this vile killing, we may well return to that, but we definitely, as it's a Friday, will be going to the Kids Who Read Succeed campaign, and we have another celebrity reader. All that and more.
Paul's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Thousands of Eurostar passengers have been disrupted after services between London and Paris were suspended because of an unexploded bomb. The explosive, which dates back to the Second World War, was discovered near tracks in France. 10 services have been affected already, with cancellations from Gare du Nord and to St Pancras expected until at least 12 p.m. LBC's France correspondent Peter Allen has more.
There is a bomb disposal team on site. Nearby properties are being evacuated, and clearly the main aim now is to make the bomb and the area safe. We don't know when the lines are going to be reopened.
Sir Keir Starmer will lead talks with European leaders later to discuss putting peacekeeping troops in Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed discussions between Washington and Kyiv will begin in Saudi Arabia next week. The Ukrainian leader will travel to Riyadh, though he won't be involved in the talks himself. An NHS trust is investigating claims healthcare staff illegally accessed medical records of the Nottingham stabbings victims. The medical director has apologised and insists action will be taken. 19-year-olds Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were killed alongside 65-year-old Ian Coates in June 2023. Barnaby's mother, Emma Webber, has told LBC it's distressing for all of them.
None of this is right. The scale of the failures and the disrespect, the voyeurism and the unprofessional behaviour, to think it's okay to potentially just have a look at their records when they were in A&E. You know, what kind of individuals are these?
The government is expected to back a ban on children under the age of 16 from using social media. MPs are due to debate a private member's bill in Parliament later. It aims to make smartphones less addictive by lowering the digital age of consent. And London's Mayor, Sir Sadiq Khan claims boroughs opposed to the expansion to ULEZ have benefited the most. Places like Sutton, Croydon and Bromley found harmful air pollutants fell by around 15%. But critics say people have been forced to change jobs and it's a huge financial expense to businesses. In the city, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading down 41 points at 86.41. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.19. LBC weather cloudy with spells of rain pushing in from the south, staying dry with sunny spells in the far north and southeast, feeling mild, a high of 17 degrees. From
these very sensitive border areas before we can commit to anything else. So it's not that we are not willing to join this coalition of the willing, because we are actually doing it as we speak.
Meanwhile, the Russian ambassador to the UK says Moscow has categorically ruled out the prospect of NATO peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine. Andrei Kellen branded the proposal senseless.
I have seen already multiple ideas, multiple plans about ceasefire temporarily for 1 month in the air and in the sea. It's a crazy idea. We will never accept it, and they are perfectly aware of that.
President Trump has announced that most goods imported from Mexico and some from Canada will be exempt from his latest trade tariffs for at least 4 weeks. The levies were imposed just days ago.
It's just a modification short term, because I didn't want to hurt the American. It would have hurt the American car companies if I did that.
Data suggests the delay could spare U.S. consumers an extra $4,000 when buying a new car. It's the second pause in tariffs the president has imposed on Mexico and Canada. The former Liverpool Mayor Joe Anderson and former Deputy Leader Derek Hatton have been charged with bribery and misconduct over council contracts. They're among 12 people charged with the offences. Merseyside Police has been investigating business deals at Liverpool City Council between 2010 and 2020. A new government scheme is offering toddlers more help to learn to brush their teeth. Nurseries and primary schools in deprived areas of England are being invited to take part. Ministers hope it'll reduce tooth decay, which is the most common reason behind 5 to 9-year-olds being admitted to hospital. Parentkind's Director of Policy, Frank Young, says young families would appreciate the extra support.
We need to step in and provide help and support to encourage those habits so that when those children are older, they're not putting added pressure on schools, on the health system and other areas of public life.
And Eurostar services have been suspended after an unexploded bomb from World War II was discovered on the tracks in Paris. It's affecting trains to and from London, with customers being asked to postpone their trips. France's national train operator says traffic will be stopped at Gare du Nord until at least mid-morning. And for a news bulletin when you want it...
Morning, it is Friday morning. It is 6 minutes past 9 and it's lovely to have you with us. If you are a regular listener to Times Radio Breakfast, you will know that 7 days a week at this time, we get the views of two thoughtful people, two big brains on the news of the day.
And our Friday big brains are the former shadow Conservative Government Minister of Wonder, the former Conservative Education Secretary Baroness Morgan. Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning. I answer to anything and everything. Honestly, I'm not feeling like a big brain. That's basically I'll just hide behind all sorts of other titles.
Well, it's very kind of you. I butchered your title, but it was very kind of you. It reminds me of the time where I went through my school life and I was just called my sister's name for the entire life. I was just called Danielle, and by the end I just responded to it.
It reminds me of the person who always texts in and calls you Tilly.
Yes, that's true.
Chloe. Lord McConnell's with us as well. Jack McConnell. Morning, Jack.
Good morning, Danielle.
Morning.
Jack's a former Labour First Minister of Scotland, of course.
So this morning we have heard from the Health Minister Stephen Kinnock on why the NATO alliance will be the key to combating the war in Ukraine.
NATO is absolutely vital, and for the last 80 years, our defence umbrella, with the United States being a crucially important part of that, has been a vital part of our own national security.
And Ukrainian MP Alexei Goncharenko has also been critical this morning of President Zelensky.
In 2019, when Zelensky ran for the president for the first time, he promised that he will not seek re-election, that he will be president just one term. Maybe it's time for Zelensky to remind this.
Well, we also spoke to Eleanor Carouet, who is a French MP in Macron's Renaissance Party, asked her about the Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer working relationship.
One thing is obviously trying to continue the diplomatic way and continuing the discussions with the US, but on the other hand, increasing our autonomy and showing that we're capable of making proposals, because both the UK and France are two nuclear powers.
So can good relations between France and the UK last? And is something of a coalition of the willing enough to tackle Russian aggression? Plus, we're considering whether there's a split forming in Reform UK as infighting ensues on their message on Ukraine. Plus, we'll be asking about schools and teachers' responsibility to get kids to brush their teeth. Here's Felicity Gillespie, the director of the early years charity Kindred Squared.
The lack of school readiness of 5-year-olds, and toothbrushing, of course, is one of those skills that children should be learning before the age of 5, from when their teeth start coming through. It's having a hugely detrimental effect, not just on those children, but on all children in schools, on the schools themselves.
Well, join the conversation. You can text us 87222 and start your message with the word Times. You can WhatsApp us. The number is 0333 003 2353, including if that is to critique the level of frivolity that lasted all of 34 seconds. Good morning, Amanda.
Right, well, let's begin by talking about, France and the UK working closer together than we've seen really in very much of a long time. We know that Keir Starmer, we know that Emmanuel Macron are meeting today. We think probably virtually, but they're having another conversation in this quest to try and bring about some kind of peace deal in Ukraine. And I wonder whether you think, Nikki, that there is, a healthy sense of maybe competitiveness here between the two of them, because both of them have been very statesmanlike. We've already heard Emmanuel Macron talking about ready to use the French nuclear deterrent to protect all of Europe. Do you think that it's a healthy bit of rivalry potentially, or you think that they're working well together?
Look, I think they're probably working well together, basically. But I mean, there's always a history of a little bit of rivalry between the English and the French. Although, as we've seen in conflicts in the past, when needed, obviously particularly in relation to the two world wars of the 20th century, actually there has been support by the English for the French. But I don't think a little bit of healthy tension is perhaps not a bad thing, in the sense that if it means that both are very keen to be seen to be convening. I mean, I'm sure that President Macron is not unambitious for President Macron and for France. So he's always going to want to be seen to be making key offers, and but if it drives the right behaviours, which is the EU and European nations spending more on defence. I say right decisions in the sense of that's the right decision for the current sort of geopolitics we're facing, but also it means there is a bit more independence from reliance on a very unreliable United States at the moment. I think the key question is going to be who is it? Is it Keir Starmer? Is it Emmanuel Macron? Which one of them has the greatest, I say credibility, but ability to influence the White House? And hopefully the other will understand that if it's one of them rather than the other, they'll stand back and allow that to happen. That the key thing is going to be, I suppose, in this, particularly in terms of making NATO work. And I agree with Stephen Kinnock. NATO is absolutely key to all of this. got to be actually making the case to the US ultimately that they must stand behind NATO, and it's in their interests to have security in Europe.
Jack, what do you make of that relationship between Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer at the moment?
I think it's one of the few positive signs that we have globally right now. It's maybe in some ways long overdue. I think when both countries were inside the EU, there was always a tension between the two for the general direction of the EU, for leadership, and so on. I think in the new world order, then this is an absolutely critical relationship. Two nuclear powers, two members of the UN Security Council, both with a global reach beyond Europe, which will be critical in terms of building support for this coalition and maintaining support for the idea of democracy and freedom and sovereignty in this very dangerous world. I think it's also that it's critical that they, while they take that lead, that they keep in particular Meloni in Italy on board. She is the one, I think, that can reach beyond the more traditional politics of France and the UK. At the moment there might be a problem with Hungary and Slovakia. There's obviously a big problem with the United States. But Meloni does have contacts and allies in these countries. And she is very strong in Ukraine. So I think keeping her in this leadership tent, I think, will be important. And I also think respecting the frontline states, Poland and the Baltic states and so on, respecting their position where they are already making a huge contribution to this effort and being ready to defend the lines should events develop. I think making sure that relationship is tight as well, I think will be critical for the success of this mission.
Nikki, it's interesting that Jack mentions there about Giorgia Meloni and the influence that she can have with some difficult nations. I guess there's also the question of how much influence can Starmer and Macron actually have over Trump. They went to the White House, they were all very polite. Yes, okay, they stood up a little bit, but, there was no real tension there. And of course, we don't know what happens on behind closed doors. And Trump obviously said that Starmer was a really strong negotiator. But I'm just wondering how much Trump's actually even going to listen to Starmer and Macron at the end of the day.
Well, as I said, that's the key question, and I think Jack is absolutely right to mention George Meloni as well, and other European leaders. I mean, those sort of perhaps are the three key ones at the moment, but clearly Donald Tusk in Poland is also influential in certain circles. I guess, I mean, the real holy grail of international diplomacy is that you use the right leader to make. To build bridges, to build contacts, build influence with other leaders. And I think that, what we see at the moment, certainly for the EU leaders, is that they are prepared to say, well, actually, you've got more influence here, you're the person this one will listen to. And don't forget, yes, we see the leaders in action, but there is a whole network of diplomats, of embassies, of ambassadors who are all busy, talking to lots of different nations, including the US. And so, yes, of course, they set things up for the leaders, but there's massive amounts of work, as you say, going on behind the scenes. Again, different nations will have different credibility and influence with other different nations, and knowing how to deploy that is the real secret.
It's just, I'm finding it all extremely interesting to follow, and of course there'll be more today. Starmer is speaking to European leaders this morning. These aren't sort of public things, but he's speaking to European leaders this morning. He'll be speaking to Macron as well today. We should get information on what's being discussed. They're just not kind of happening in public in all of that. So we'll continue to keep you up to date on Times Radio as we have.